I'm going to do a couple breaks here, but I'm going to do the Italian Renaissance with the early Renaissance. Then we're going to do the high Renaissance. I think we're probably going to do two different lectures, but we'll see how it goes. All right, first, the header, the Italian Renaissance. As I'm doing this, we're going to be identifying key artists, their accomplishments, and how they impacted the age. But an underlying thing that I do hope you continue to hold on to is see how each of these pieces attempted to push a humanist paradigm. It may not be perfect for everyone, but there will be some very specific ones that we'll look at. Real quick, I just wanted to point out the continuity and change, right? That's what we're looking at. And this is going to be the change. This is going to go back to the evidence of Dr. Burckhardt, right? We know that Dr. Burckhardt identified the Renaissance as a unique time a unique time period that was unique from the Middle Ages. Well, this would be some of the information that would go down there. Nothing to write. You're not going to be assessed necessarily on this, but I just wanted to point out some things. Number one, sculpture. This is going to be the sculptures reintroduced, right? And you see two examples of this. These are both done by Donatello. The one on the left is Mary Magdalene. The one to the right is his version of David in marble, which doesn't quite look great. But again, we see it. So by the time we get to the 1300s, the modern era is beginning because they're able to create sculpture. And sculpture becomes public art that will then help push a paradigm. We're going to see that early Renaissance art was not as flat. This is a good example of this is called Adoration of the Lamb, I believe it is, where it's very difficult to kind of make out what's going on there. Look at that. It's very difficult. It's very flat. It almost looks like stickers, right? That's medieval. They don't have time to contemplate how to make art better. Well, this is a great example of perspective, right? We see three different areas, stage one, stage two, and then the background. And each area is creating perspective and depth. This is an interesting piece, isn't it, right? And a couple things, we don't need to talk about that, but this is called the Baptism of Christ. Again, I just think it's a really cool piece. And it should show, hopefully you see it's not as flat. The architecture. When we look at early Renaissance, medieval architecture, it's going to be all about the elements of going to God. This is gaudy. It's not very balanced. When you look at this kind of cathedral, it looks like it's about to tip over. This is an example. This is one of the places in France. And again, just look how big those doorways are. Well, this is the contrast. This is Il Duomo, which we're going to talk later about. But I want to point out, you see the dome. These are the first domes in antiquity. And the dome represents, if you look in the background, Florence is in a valley, and this meshes beautifully. It looks like it really naturally fits in Florence geographically. Well, this doesn't fit anywhere. It is meant to be gaudy and visual. This is meant to be beautiful and natural. Now, that's kind of there. I just wanted to rush kind of through that. But now let's look at the Italian Renaissance. The Italian Renaissance, these are key traits that cover the entire era from all three periods. We see the focus on antiquity. And this is where you might be a little confused. All Italian Renaissance pretty much glorifies in some way, shape, or form the Catholic Church, or at least is endorsed by the Catholic Church. The reason this is true is because as you do your power maps, you've probably seen that the artists are very arrogant. They feel like they're creators. They think they're great and perfect. Well, that's pride. And one of the 7 deadly sins that can send you to hell, according to medieval Catholic theology, was pride. So what happens here, these Renaissance artists who really want to create a new paradigm, they fear that they're going to go to hell. So therefore, they want to work for the Pope. And remember, we said it during the summer assignments, and we said it again the other day. According to this, the Pope is Jesus's best friend. He is Jesus' replacement on earth. So if you get favor of the Pope, guess where you won't go? Yep, you won't go to hell. You'll skip over purgatory and go straight to heaven. And that was one of the ideas. I hope that makes more sense. And these are the three eras of the Italian Renaissance: the early Renaissance, the high Renaissance, and the late Renaissance. And what we'll find out about the late Renaissance, there's really little that relates to the other two. We're going to see how that fits. The late Renaissance will not be assessed at all. I will only tell you the impact. And you can kind of see right now, what event started the late Renaissance? What happened in 1527? Think. Yeah, that would be the sack of Rome, and we'll see that. All right, guys. So we've kind of identified what the Renaissance is. We've talked about traits, right? We know antiquity in the church. And this is the early Renaissance. It's where the modern artistic world begins. The key traits will be perspective, or 3D. Not surprising, they've just discovered Euclid, the father of geometry. Well, they're going to apply Euclid's work in their art. The artists were still considered artisans. They weren't really super special people. They were just kind of like the people, everyday people. And it's Florentine centered, which it's the Florence. And remember, what's the family? Yeah, the Medici. Absolutely. And we see that. Now, we're going to kind of look through. Let's look at sculpture. Donatello is the father of Renaissance sculpture. This is his most famous piece, right? It's a most famous piece called David. This is the bronze David. Definitely not the David that we saw earlier, but this is his one. And the reason it's bronze is because the techniques weren't good enough yet to really make good marble sculpture. So what he did was, he being a specialist in metallurgy, he created a mold and then was able to produce this. Now, real quick, I will tell you, David is one of the most favorite humanist Bible stories. The reason is, I'm going to just say it real quick, and then I'm going to tell you the story. David was individually responsible for his actions. If you're a Christian, if you come from the Jewish or your Muslim background, you will say, well, David did some different things. He did it in God. Totally true. But from more of a secular standpoint, David alone worked. This is a sculpture, and I think it best represents the early Renaissance. This is a 12-year-old boy, and you can see from the face, you can even see from the development of the body with the pecs. He's not well developed. This is not the perfect guy. He's just a 12-year-old boy. Well, this is the better setting. This is a more realistic idea, because a 12-year-old boy came. He saw what was happening. He was very frustrated with the people of Israel because they weren't going to fight this Goliath guy. And he says, screw it. I'm going to do it on my own. And he went out there with a slingshot and killed the giant Goliath. Well, this is that story. It's about power. It's about individualism. And I do think that's going to be the Renaissance. Now, with the early, how best does this represent early Renaissance? It represents the youth. The early Renaissance was young, like a 12-year-old boy. They were innocent, like a 12-year-old boy. They didn't know what the world was about, but they're learning. And the third thing is they're looking to a bright future. And 12-year-old David is now looking down, and he is going to be the king of the Israelites. So I do think Donatello really does this piece to get the flavor of the age, to give a sense of hope, innocence, youth, and future. I hope you see that. Now, Giotto, as we saw in our summer readings, he was the father of Renaissance painting. He's the one that introduced perspective. He loved to illustrate facial expression and emotion, which we've talked about, right? And this piece is called The Ascension. More likely, I'm going to quickly look at this. You see, this is probably the first place you look. They look here, and then they look up, and then you look out. I believe when Giotto created this piece, he wanted you to do step 1, 2, 3, and 4. He wanted to create the depth and perspective, to create motion through this piece, to add interest. If you don't quite see it, not a big deal. Again, this is where it's introduced. Perspective is introduced. It's not perfect. Here we see the funeral of St. Francis. This is his most famous piece. More unlikely, again, I'm going to show you perspective and I'll explain it in a second. There's the first thing you look. He's looking at dead St. Francis. Then you probably look here, come up here, and this is the spirit of St. Francis. Though these guys are demonstrating mourning and sadness, in the end, you don't have to worry because he is now in heaven. So this piece is about, at the funeral of St. Francis, it's not about his death, but it's about the mourning of the others. I hope you saw the perspective. Real quick, St. Francis was one of the favorite monks of the age. He died around 1200, give or take 100 years. Because St. Francis, I love what he says. And I think the humanists really groove this. One of the famous statements from St. Francis said, preach always, use words only if necessary. And what he meant by that is your faith must be done in action. Think about the humanist. This really played very well, but that's another story. Now, Masaccio. Masaccio builds upon what Giotto starts. And if you see my P2 slide, I do think he perfected Giotto's technique. You should recognize this piece. And again, this is a power mapping 101 thing. This takes up 1/3 of a page. So therefore, in your pre-read that I've taught you about, you should be able to there and you know the story. The story, and this is before, let's look at the perspective. You see, this is the focus. Then you have a part of a story. And look at the angle, right? Look at the angle of this story. It's meant to tell a fine story. And here we go. I'll tell you really quick. Number one, here's Jesus. Here's Peter. Here's a tax collector or a Pharisee. The Pharisee challenges Jesus and says, what you doing, man? Don't you pay taxes? They're trying to trick Jesus. Jesus says, whatever, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. He then commands Peter to go to the water. So this is one. Here's two. And here's Peter going to the water. And when he goes to the water, a fish jumps out and spits a coin to him. Well, what then happens? Here we see the tax collector or Pharisee and Peter, and he's paying the tax. This is called the narrative piece, which you probably already know because of the pre-read. I hope when you look at this, it is clearly perspective is perfected. And this is called tribute money. Now, Botticelli, he is the one that perfects classical painting. He is the greatest artist of the early Renaissance. He paints from the 1460s to 1480s. And he is actually more famous at his time than Da Vinci. Da Vinci was a middle-aged guy by this time, maybe a little earlier than that. But Botticelli was so much more famous. Well, there's a whole story to this. If you want to know this piece, totally cool. You can check this out. You can just search it. But what I want to point out, the reason I say it perfects classical painting, if you look at the wholeness of the canvas, or this is more of a wall, you see that it's equally lit. And there's wonderful balance here. But in the balance, you see movement, and you can see that. You can see where it's like the goddesses are blowing air, and then you can see the wind blowing with that. And then out of this, you get the birth of Venus. Venus is mythological, Roman, and let's just say this is not Christian. This was media used to push humanism, reconnecting antiquity, challenging people to think about perfection and truth prior to the church. But with that said, I love this piece, and we can chit-chat about it later. And here's Primavera. If you want to know more about this, you can check that out in your textbook, because this is the piece you should have in your power map. I do believe this is probably from the Gothic aspect of the Renaissance. We'll talk more about that later. Now, one of the fun facts, I do hope in our class you paid attention, Botticelli was so famous, but he had a religious conversion. He became a Christian. He has this spiritual revelation, and he feels so horrible that his art was media to push humanism. What does he do? He tries to destroy every piece of art that he can get his hands on. Because of that, he is no longer a favored humanist artist, and he's almost forgotten. Again, a Christian revelation and now he's excluded from Renaissance society. I do think that's important for you to think about. Now, in the early Renaissance, you see architecture. This is Brunelleschi is the father of Renaissance architecture. And this is, it should say El Duomo, I believe. I apologize, but I love this dome. This is the cathedral in Florence, it was paid for by the Medici, and this was the first modern dome. It was the first dome since antiquity. If you don't know, domes hold themselves up. It's the reason why it's so difficult to make domes. If you make one mistake, they will implode. But again, this is in Florence. If you ever get a chance to go there, I will tell you, you will get goosebumps as you drive into Florence and see Il Duomo. This is what it looks like in the inside. This is a wonderful example of Renaissance architecture. You see three characteristics here. A, you see balance. Uses the arches and columns to bring balance. B, you see simplicity. It's beautiful, but simple. And three, it's elegant. You see that these are Corinthian columns. They're decorative, but they're still simplistic. So when you look at this, they're going to be balanced, simple, and elegant. Those are going to be the three traits of Renaissance architecture. Now, as we kind of see this, we've seen art, we've seen sculpture, painting, and architecture. And now we're going to see the unraveling of the early Renaissance as we go to the High Renaissance. We should know that the Italian Wars removed Florence as the capital. By 1500, Florence is absolutely destroyed. That's why, as a historian, I like to say 1494 into the early Renaissance. But again, it's up to you to decide. Not a big deal. The papacy, because the Pope owns 25% of Europe, he is mad wealthy. The church has so much wealth that he is going to become the chief patron of the arts. We're going to find out the Leo X is the most important, but we'll see that later. The characteristics of the High Renaissance: realism. They're going to really try to look at what a real person, real art, real nature look like. But they're also going to identify idealism. They want to know what the perfect human is. And everything's going to be larger than life. All right. I always talk about the big three plus one. The plus one is Bramante. The big three would be Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Here we see Da Vinci. We see he's a true humanist. He's truly a humanist. He's a painter, sculptor, architect, engineer, a musician. He studied anatomy. He studied everything. He was so much smarter than probably anybody alive today. And this is the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa is identified as the perfect portrait. And again, portraits are part of the Renaissance because of the value of individualism. There's two important parts here you can draw, or two interesting parts. Number one, look at the background. There are art historians who believe the background is actually more important than the actual subject. The background has many images of Hermeticism and pantheism. It's that natural aspect. So when people look at the beauty of Mona Lisa, he is calling them to look at the beauty of earth, the beauty of nature, and the beauty of the real God. And if you want to talk more about that, we can. The fun fact is, even though most historians do disagree with this, there are still some people that believe Mona Lisa is actually a self-portrait of Da Vinci. I'll let you ponder, draw some conclusions about what that talks about with Da Vinci, but once again, that's a very interesting aspect. If you didn't know Mona Lisa, which I'd be shocked, you probably know about The Last Supper. This is probably the way you've seen The Last Supper. This is a wonderful piece. Look at the perspective, guys. You got angles. Right? You got a circle. You have steps, right? And all those angles. Da Vinci drew all these lines before he painted because he wanted to use geometry to add perspective or depth. This is the way you probably know it, but this is actually the way it is. I do point out it's larger than life. Look how big that is. It's on a wall, very large. And it's a mural. Fun fact, he painted oil paint directly on the wall, so it's constantly in the need of repair. I'm not sure, but it seems like it's cost thousands, if not $10,000s of dollars each year to maintain. But you can check that out yourself. This is another piece. I dropped this here just to prove to you that he's more than just an artist. He has thousands of pages of manuscripts on science, and this is called the Vitruvian Man. And this is his evidence of the study of anatomy. You can see the movement here. What he did, he had a nude male model right in front of him, and he had to move his arms up and down so he can find how the muscles flexed. He wanted to do this so that he can better paint humans. He was a perfectionist, and one thing I probably didn't say in class, he hardly ever finished any of his art. He was one of those guys who attempted to do his best, but when he felt like he was just kind of failing, he would leave a piece. You can check that out yourself, but that's not that important for our class. We need to know that he's a humanist man. He's a total humanist, universal man. He did art and he did science. Now, Michelangelo may be the greatest artist ever. He best exemplified the arrogance of the high Renaissance. He believed himself to be the divine one or the godly one. That's kind of arrogant. Michelangelo never wanted to be seen as a painter. He always wanted to be seen as a sculptor. And what we see here is in his sculpture. This is his David. David, I believe it is 17 feet tall. So his David best represents, before I talk about the piece, his David best represents the high Renaissance. If you juxtapose it to Donatello's David best represents the early Renaissance. Michelangelo's David represents perfectly high Renaissance. So being 17 feet tall, it's larger than life, right? It's also about realism. Look at this stuff, man. Look at his pecs. Totally built, right? Don't you wish you had his abs? Look at his hands. If you want to Google, search Michelangelo's David, see the hundreds, if not thousands of pictures out there. You can see the actual bones in the hands. He sculpted this perfectly. Look at his ankles and feet. If you get a chance, when I was in Florence, I walked in, I was overwhelmed with emotion when I saw this. Such a large, but it best represents the realistic look of a human being with the study of the muscles and things. And it also represents what? It represents the idealism. This David represents what a perfect man looks like. With that said, is this really a 12-year-old boy? Does a 12-year-old boy really have those biceps? Not at all. So this sculpture is less about David, the biblical hero, and more about David, the individual of power. So therefore, Michelangelo's David best represents the high Renaissance. I hope you guys get that. Maybe I'll type that up later so you can see how I would write. But my favorite piece is La Pieta. This is in Rome. And La Pieta is basically the dead Jesus on the lap of Mary. This is one of the most famous. This is the part I really think you try to memorize, because in December, we're going to see a painting. There's going to be a guy. I'm like, hey guys, what do you see here? I'm hoping one or two of you can say, ooh, that's Jesus, right? And from before, I'm like, yes. But La Pieta is about the Savior, the Savior's death. This precedes his resurrection. He has just died from the cross. And here, Mary, look at Mary. Does she look like a 50-year-old woman? Of course not. So with this, he again is created a fiction here. He's trying to tell the story of the Virgin Mary, how the Virgin Mary maintained her youth, and she's holding Jesus. Now, my fun fact is, one of the things about La Pietas, people had a really hard time staging it. The way Michelangelo does it, look at Mary's hips. Do they look natural? Those hips are so large. They're so unnatural and unrealistic. But Michelangelo is willing to take it and go a little unrealistic so that now Jesus could be perfectly on a stage. I'll let you ponder through that. Not hugely important. For us, you just need to know the two pieces, David and La Pieta. This piece is called Creation. Where is this found? Absolutely. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I love this piece. This is such a wonderful piece. These are called frescoes. A fresco is an artistic technique where you put oil paint directly in wet plaster. So when it dries, the painting now is part of the wall, which you can kind of see with the cracks. This is what the Sistine Chapel it looks like when you walk in. There is a very specific wall that's missing. We'll see that later. These walls over here are covered with wonderful art from so many different Renaissance artists. Our focus is going to be the ceiling, and the ceiling is where Michelangelo painted. And here's a panoramic view of it. You can see right there creation. Real quick to take your notes, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, this is about the story of Genesis. Whoops. The first book of the Bible. It goes from book 1 all the way to the flood. So if you're there, you look up, you see wonderfulness. Oh my gosh, it is absolutely beautiful. This is the piece, I don't need you to know about this one. I just want to point this out. I think this is part of the Sistine Chapel's roof. I want you to know creation of Adam. But this piece is the flood. Look at the agony. Those 3 pieces, even over here, you see fear, agony, eventual death, right? If you don't know, according to the book of Genesis, a great flood destroyed the evil world, and Noah, the ark over here, will rekindle society. But that's another story. I wanted to point out you see individualism and you see emotion. And here, me and my daughter in 2017, we happened to be in Rome. You can see, I love this piece. One of the fun facts, you're not allowed to take pictures in the Sistine Chapel because they want you to keep on moving. Hundreds of people are there. You're shoulder to shoulder. Doubt we'd be there right now with COVID, but we're there. And I quickly got my phone out to do a selfie. And my daughter said, "Gosh, too bad we didn't get creation in that." I looked at her and I said, "Silly little girl." That's where we were because it was a perfect location. But that's just my flexing a little bit. Let's move on. Raphael. Raphael is one of the big 3. He's the younger one. He's a student of Michelangelo's. He loves soft inner beauty. He also paints pudgy. Pudginess. Pudginess at this moment was a sign of wealth. We'll talk more about that later. His most famous pieces are called the Madonna series. Madonna means Virgin Mary and the Chill. And this is an example. And I just wanted to look. If you look at the Madonna, you see pudginess. Look at her neck. Look at her arms, and just look how tight the blouse is. Very important that I point that out. If you look at a piece of art and you see pudginess, really good chance it's Raphael. As we kind of finish, we're going to maneuver ourselves now straight into his most famous piece, the School of Athens. The School of Athens doesn't have any pudginess at all, right? But the School of Athens, for me, best represents the Renaissance in general. How so? Number 1, these are 3 things that tell us that the School of Athens best represents the Renaissance. Number 1, he uses arches and shading to create depth. Look at that. You look like you're actually looking into the quote-unquote School of Athens. The School of Athens is really not a physical thing. It's more of a creative, and I'll talk about that in a second. But look at the arches and shading. Look at the blue sky. I promise you it is as beautiful as it looks, probably even more. Number 2, it's a perfect illustration of secularism. This is in the Vatican, the personal household of the Pope. He had Raphael come and for a whole year paint this jank. And guess what person is missing? Yeah, there's no Jesus. So this is supposed to be a reflective picture for him to meditate, the Pope to meditate, and there's no Jesus. So therefore, this is a perfect illustration of secularism. Number 3, this is the whole reason for the Renaissance. It illustrates the Greco-Roman heroes teaching the humanists. Right here, the center of all knowledge is Plato and Aristotle. And throughout this, you will see other heroes. Over here, you see the globe. That's going to be a guy named Ptolemy. Over here, you might see Pythagoras, and we're going to talk more about each individual in a second. Fun fact, that's Raphael. He paints himself here to be part of the amazement. He is amazed. He's listening to these Greco-Roman heroes. This is Michelangelo. He's contemplating life. And right here, the model for Plato is Aristotle, or excuse me, is Da Vinci. It's kind of cool that he used his heroes. But once again, this is it. So it represents perspective, it represents secularism, and it represents the Greco-Roman world being the center of all knowledge. I'm not going to go, oh, there I am with my selfie. Love it. My daughter called it a dad selfie and laughed at me. You can laugh at me, it's fine. But here you can kind of go through each of these slides on your own, and you can see the different individuals. Not mandatory. I do believe that film clip still works. Well, you can check it out. And all these are other Greco-Romans. This is the fun one. Zoroaster, he created a religion. Oh, there's Plato. I've circled the wrong one. But Zoroaster created a whole religion that was different than Christianity. And that's on a Catholic wall. Just ponder that. You see Euclid, the father of geometry. And that's it. That's it. Now, with that, Bramante, I just want to point out Bramante was the greatest of the Renaissance architects. And this is right outside St. Peter's Basilica and Sistine Chapel. It's called Tempietto. And it marks the place where people believe that Peter was executed. Duh. And the Catholics believe that Peter was the first pope. We can talk about that later. But again, you see beauty, you see balance, you see simplicity, and you see elegance. This is one of the greatest buildings ever built in Rome. It's called St. Peter's Basilica. It was so large it took several people to make it, but both Bramante and Michelangelo contributed. So now we see Michelangelo is a painter, he's a sculptor, and now you have evidence with the St. Peter's Basilica that he was an architect. Now, if we're going to compare and contrast the early and high Renaissance, I really like this. Look at this piece right here with Paolo Uccello's. This is St. George and the Dragon. St. George was a great story. They loved it. Kind of look at this. Sometimes we call this, it's considered Gothic. You probably see it. It's very weird looking. It's early Renaissance. And here's Raphael's, same piece. You can actually find, if you ever go to Washington, D.C., and you go to the National Gallery of Art, this piece is there, at least used to be. I hope you see the difference. Over here in the early Renaissance, you have a lot of things going on, right? I'm not sure what to look at. Am I looking at this? Am I looking at St. George? Am I looking at the dragon? Am I looking at the poor woman who's being saved? But over here, we see the perfection of art because he's using a pyramid. So he draws the pyramid, look at that, but that's not the only pyramid. Forgive me for my drawing issues. There's a little triangle, which probably comes down to here. And he was constantly looking at it. And I do hope you see that in the high Renaissance Raphael's painting, you see more organization. It's really easy. I think you're supposed to look here first, there second, and there third. We're over here. I think he's trying to go 1, 2, 3, but I just don't think he's very successful. But that's for you to see. There is part of the quiz and the test that we're going to need to know. You're going to need to make sure you're able to compare and contrast early and high Renaissance. I can give you a piece that you've never seen before, and you should be able to place it either early or high. If you have more questions about that, we will chit chat about that. Now, why did the high Renaissance come to an end? It's a perfect. The high Renaissance. Everybody thought Rome was the center of the world, right? The big three, the divine one, all this cool stuff. It's the greatest stuff ever. Well, let's see what happens. The Italian War is absolutely destroyed. By the time we get to 1527 and the sack of Rome, that one time feeling that we're the greatest in the world. Well, what happens when you place yourself up on a pedestal? Yeah, of course you're going to fall off of it. And in 1527, with the sack of Rome, that comes to a crashing in. No longer did Italy feel great. Little fun fact: Charles the First, that ordered the sack of Rome, the people in Italy, they believed that Charles was the Antichrist of Revelation. They believed that he was ushering in the end of end of the world. Kind of interesting. And the late Renaissance art reflected hopelessness of the age and chaos. This is really where our lecture ends, but I'm going to point out a couple pieces of it after. This is in the Sistine Chapel. Remember that wall that I said you didn't see? This is Michelangelo's final painting of the Sistine Chapel. This is on the wall. It's called The Last Judgment. Here's Jesus casting judgment on everyone. It's really an interesting piece. If you wanted to know more about this, I believe he painted it around 1530, well after. If you look at it, it looks very different. You see chaos. Little fun fact: one of the religious leaders of the age, a bishop who just continuously irritated Michelangelo, he's right there in hell. And let's just say he was a little mad when he came in and saw that Michelangelo had put him into hell. But that was a fun fact. But this is The Last Judgment. It really illustrates the chaos of the age, and it ushers in the late Renaissance. And these are going to be some examples. And again, we don't need to know these for this test. I just wanted to show you. Does this look the same or different than Da Vinci's Last Supper? You better be saying different. Look how awkward the table is angled. It makes you feel uncomfortable, doesn't it? And look at light and the angels. You're probably saying, what in the world is going on? Well, Tintorino is attempting to convey in this piece the chaos of the results of the Italian Wars. And here's another one. This is Pontormo's Entombment. And again, I tell you the area, it's something 1528, so this is right after. Look how crowded that piece is. It's uncomfortable. It's almost as if Jesus is kind of falling out of the piece. If you don't know this is Jesus, he's falling out of the piece. Chaos, uncomfortable. So in conclusion, guys, we just kind of see during the early Renaissance, humanists attempted to convey emotion, perspective, and individualism to mark a new beginning and celebrate humanism. During the High Renaissance, humanist artists sought to convey realism, balance, and greatness of the era. They used religious scenes to tell a story of pantheism, Neapolitanism, and even Hermeticism. I don't know if I did a great job in this Loom video doing that, so I will definitely field questions about that. I'll give you some examples, but just know that idea. But with such arrogance, the sack of Rome brought the Italian Renaissance down to reality, and the Mannerist art of the late Renaissance displays the chaos of the era. And that brings us to an end, guys. I hope that this was informative. I hope this was good for you to kind of conclude with. And with that said, have a great day.